time, years after the life of Bach. The occasion, a music lesson. The teacher, a pupil of Bach. Bach, by the way, is also a German word for a brook or a little river. The student, Ludwig van Beethoven. The music, the Well-Tempered Clavier by Johann Sebastian Bach. Not Bach, but Mir, not a brook, but a sea, should his name be, said young Beethoven. Bach was the master of masters. Not only was he probably the greatest composer that ever lived, he was also a conductor, a fine performer, and an excellent teacher. Some of his best students were his own children, and Bach had 20 children. But his favorite student was his wife, Anna Magdalena. He wrote 2 books of music especially for her. Maybe you know a few of the pieces from these books, like this one. Bach is very famous for his fugues. He wrote scores of them. A fugue is a special musical form, and it always starts a special way. One voice begins alone and plays a melody. Then a second voice answers it. Doing the same thing the first one did, only starting on a different note. Then a third voice comes in, also playing the same melody. Sometimes 4, 5, or 6 voices join in. During his lifetime, Bach was more famous for his playing than his composing. Once he was challenged by a famous French musician named Marchand to a harpsichord contest. The contest was to take place at the court of King Ferdinand Augustus. All the great ladies and gentlemen of the court were waiting for the contest to begin when they were informed that Marchand got scared and ran away. So, not to disappoint all the people, Bach sat down and improvised. On and on he played, and all the people were thrilled. They thought he was the greatest musician alive. A wonderful performer, but as a composer, he was considered old-fashioned, even by his own children. Very little of his music was published. Slowly, Bach was becoming a forgotten composer. 79 years had passed when Mendelssohn revived interest in Bach, and 21 more years went by before a society was formed to publish all of Bach's works. There was so much music that it took 10 editors 50 years to complete the job. Today, Bach is more popular than ever because so many people realize what a great genius Bach was. That surprised you, didn't it? 170 years ago, Joseph Haydn played this musical joke on his audience. He wrote this loud chord just to see the ladies jump. Haydn enjoyed playing all kinds of musical and practical jokes. As a young boy, he was in the choir of a great church in Vienna. All the choir boys had to wear wigs. One day during the practice, young Joseph felt like cutting the pigtail off another choir boy's wig. So he did. Was he sorry? The choir master was very angry and banished poor Joseph from the choir. There were other times, though, when his jokes had happy endings. Once, when he was the conductor of the orchestra at Prince Esterhazy's palace, Haydn wanted to hint to the prince that it was time for the musicians' summer vacation. He decided to do it through his music. So in the last movement of his symphony, which he nicknamed the Farewell Symphony, he had two musicians get up, blow out their candles, electricity had not been invented yet, and leave the stage. Then two more got up, blew out their candles, and left the stage. Then two more. And two more. Until only two violinists were left on stage, still playing. They too got up, blew out their candles, and left Haydn on the dark stage alone. The prince enjoyed this joke, and he understood the hint. He immediately sent the musicians on their vacations with their families. Mozart called Joseph Haydn Papa Haydn because he was a nice, pleasant man who enjoyed helping the young, struggling musicians. We call Haydn the father of the symphony because he developed this form of music. He is responsible for a lot more than the symphony. He helped develop a blueprint, a plan which he used in writing a sonata. He used it in writing a string quartet. used it in writing a symphony. He used it in writing a concerto. This blueprint is called sonata form, and all the great composers from that time on have used this form when they wrote symphonies, concertos, sonatas, or chamber music. Haydn was almost 60 years old when he took his first trip to England. It was the first time in his life he had ever seen an ocean. On this trip he heard "God Save the King," the English national anthem, and it inspired him to write a national anthem for Austria, his country. Many years have gone by, but Haydn's music, and even his musical jokes, are still with us today. Amadeus Mozart was the most wondrous of all wonder children. At the age of 5, he composed this minuet. At the age of 6, Mozart was already going on concert tours with his sister, who was also an excellent musician. By the time he was a teenager, he had already composed symphonies and operas. When he was 21, he had gone on 11 different tours. All the time he kept on composing. Mozart wrote various kinds of compositions. One of his favorite forms of composition, besides the sonata form and the fugue, was the form of theme and variations. He would take a theme like this one. Surely all of you recognize this theme as "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." It was popular even in Mozart's days, but with different words. Using this theme as a foundation, he would build musical ideas like this one. Can you still hear the theme? Or like this one. Can you recognize "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" now? These changes on the original melody are called variations. When Mozart was in Vienna, he was invited to play with Papa Haydn and his orchestra. Naturally, he played one of his own concertos. Mozart wrote many concertos, 5 for violin, a few for clarinet, horn, flute, harp, and bassoon. But most of his concertos were for the piano, which was his chosen instrument. He also wrote many sonatas, and most of these were for the piano. Mozart lived only 35 years, but he left us an enormous amount of music. This is due to the tremendous speed at which he was able to compose. For instance, he wrote his last 3 symphonies within 6 weeks. Mozart died penniless, but he left us rich with a treasure of beautiful music. Who has not heard this music before? We are all familiar with the music of Ludwig van Beethoven. We hear it on records, we hear it on the radio, we hear it in concert. We are fortunate that we have this music to listen to. But Beethoven, the creator of all this lovely music, heard some of it only in his head, in his inner ear, never in concert. Beethoven was deaf. This wasn't always so. As a young man, Beethoven never dreamt that one day he would lose his hearing. As a boy, he had other problems. He had a cruel father who wanted to make Beethoven a second Mozart. So poor Beethoven was forced to practice all day long, sometimes even all night. Most children would end up hating music after such treatment, but not Beethoven. His love for music was greater than any hardship that could befall him. When he was older, he left home and went to Vienna to study with Haydn. This relationship didn't last long, however, because Beethoven's ideas in music were too new and different for old Papa Haydn. Beethoven's head was always full of musical ideas, and he put all of them down on paper. In order not to lose any of them, he would carry a musical sketchbook with him at all times. Whenever a musical idea came to his mind, he would put it down in his sketchbook. While walking in the Vienna woods, he would get an idea and write it down. Sitting on a tree limb, he had a musical idea. And wrote it down. Lying on the grass, he would put down any musical idea that would come to his mind. Then he would take all these ideas and work on them and develop them into his great music. Sometimes Beethoven put his feelings to music. When he was in love, he wrote the beautiful Moonlight Sonata. As he was growing older, his deafness increased. He was very unhappy about it, but he didn't let it interfere with his composing. When he wrote his most famous symphony, the Ninth Symphony, he was completely deaf. When the symphony was performed and the audience applauded enthusiastically, a friend turned Beethoven to face the audience so he could see the applause. He couldn't hear it. He died a famous man, and 20,000 people came to his funeral. Just the opposite of Mozart, to whose funeral nobody came.